I'm going to welcome Zoe here, who's spent quite a significant part of her lifespan so far on Grassland. But I also want to thank Steve Hills over here, who happens to be an avid bird conservationist, but he really started this process of thinking about how, what birds are declining the most and where should we focus our efforts. And it's amazing because he also started the nest box program at Willistown, which you have been involved with kestrel boxes and barn owl boxes, and has also been very influential and helpful with this program that we're trying to take off bird hunt. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you for coming out tonight. And the goal tonight is to share some of the work that we've been doing and then thinking about moving forward and thinking about the future of these birds in this area. So, so why we're talking about grassland birds is really.
Zoe, I need to do this. But
oh, the microphone.
Using the microphone.
Yeah.
Just for the recording purposes.
Is it on?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that. So we're talking about grassland birds because in 2020, a really shocking report came out that said that we've lost 3 billion birds since 1970. And the key finding, one of the key findings of the latest report that's come out, the State of the Birds this year, is that grassland birds are experiencing the biggest declines of any bird family. So the bad news is you can see the graph over here, the line is going in the wrong direction. We need to get it going the other way. So 2/3 of grassland birds have experienced population declines, and a quarter are actually tipping point species, and that includes our beloved bobolinks here in this area. And that means that they've lost 50% or more of their population since 1970. And in the next 50 years, without intervention, they're expected to lose another 50% of their population. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that we can be their hope. The losses of these birds can be reversed through partnership with key stakeholders who are willing to take a look at management strategies. And actually, when looking through the report and looking at how they've listed the species of concern, we're in the Piedmont area, and none of our birds are listed yet. So locally, we can help these birds before they're actually considered threatened. So we have an opportunity here to take these populations and give them a boost. So when kind of the evolution of this project goes back about 10 years, really, but I started studying these birds for my PhD and did my dissertation research out here. So I did bird surveys because I was interested in trying to predict where you would find these birds in this area, using the birds data and then also some measurements of the landscape. And when I did my maps, I found that this area is actually sort of a hotspot for these birds. There's a high probability of finding them in a lot of the grasslands here. So when I finished my PhD, I joined with Willistown Conservation Trust, and in 2020, we did a field season where we documented the breeding behavior of the birds and also looked at the timing of the cycle in 2 local populations, one at Dee Dee Matz's Buck and Doe Farm, and then at Bill Elkins's Buck Run Farm. And we were interested in knowing about the timing to help to then think about, well, when is it safe? When can we get safe mow dates? And then in 2021, we added on movement data to these timing questions. And so we were looking at local movement, and then we were also looking at regional movement when working with partners who were studying bobolinks in Vermont and in Maine. So that meant that the field season included tracking and productivity, and that meant that we would be up with the birds quite often. So our goal was always to get those nets up before the sun came up, because once the birds figured out the nets were there, they would start to toy with us. They would sit on top of the nets, or they would be zooming in, looking like, oh, we're going to catch them. And all of a sudden they'd be flying backwards, getting away from the nets. But we outsmarted at least 20 of them, more, but we did get them. We had our little makeshift field station, and we would bag them at the nets and bring them back, process them, put on color bands to identify the individual birds that we would see in the fields. And then we would be ready to get the nano tags on. So the nano tagging it's about that small, it's about the size of a quarter, and it fits like a harness that goes around their legs, with a kind of a tail, which is the antenna. And surprisingly, they really don't seem to be slowed down by it once they get the tags on. And then, of course, we ended with a mug shot so we could keep track of the usual suspects. So once the tagging was done, we were ready to start looking for the nests. And we were looking for nests at Buck and Doe Farm and at Schoolhouse Farm. We weren't really trying to do an exhaustive search because that's not, our goal was really more to just find out if we could start to look at the development of the nestlings at the beginning of June to help us understand they would be fledging and when would it be safe to mow. So around the second week of June, we found babies that were between 2 and 5 days old. They leave the nests around 10 or 11 days. So they still had probably, somewhere in there between up to like 7 days before they'd be leaving the nest. And then they kind of skulk around for about a week before they really start to fly. So as we were sort of projecting out, we thought for those birds, June 25th would be about the earliest safe date, but we also found a nest on June 16th. So for those later nesting birds, we were really looking at the end of June as really pushing the limits of safety there. One other thing that kind of drove another point home to us was we found a nest on June 10th that didn't have any nestlings, but it had a fresh fecal sac, which is the way they get rid of their waste, and then the parents pick it up and deposit it somewhere else. But so they produce these fecal sacs up to 10 days. So that meant that these babies were supposed to still be in the nest, but they weren't. So it was likely that they had been gotten by a predator, which is not uncommon. So I think, this was a bit of a sobering thought to us, because we realized, oh, okay, so even if the birds are nesting here, obviously not every nest is going to be successful. So it's really important to try to increase the success of those birds when they're nesting. So one of my favorite days was the babies at Buck and Doe Farm were old enough to put color bands on them. And, I just can't resist a begging baby bird. So we did that. We put the color bands on to see if they would be returning the following year. So while we were doing the nest searching, we were also gathering local data. We put small mini stations at the 3 farms. And what we found was that a majority of the birds were regularly detected at all 3 farms. So when they're breeding, they're not just sitting there, sitting around their nest and going over and getting a little food. They're really using the landscape connectively. They don't see the boundaries that we see. And so collectively, the habitat, the landscape provides for their habitat needs. So we also, as a part of this, we're looking at their migration data, and we were getting detections beginning in May. And one of the things that we were surprised to find was several of the females actually left during breeding season and took short jaunts or a long one up to Adirondacks. And then they would return back down here and continue during the breeding season. Our farthest point south that year was, we had several detections in Key Largo. One other thing about that, about this is it doesn't show these are just moments when they were detected, but it doesn't show duration of stay. But we also have access to timelines of their of when they're in fields. So at Bill Elkins's farm, he put a tower up, and what we found was we had many birds that had timelines like this. And what that meant was they were staying up there for weeks at a time and just using that field, and we're just getting, you know, hit after hit after hit. And so it looked like solid time up there. And we've known for a long time that that is a really important field for staging after they've bred. They go up there, they eat to their heart's content. The young ones are practicing their flights, and they'll stay there for a long time prior to migration. And it's a safe haven for them, essentially, because they're not mowing, they're grazing cattle up there. So it's a bit of a different management system. Another thing that we ended up finding was that the Delmarva Peninsula is an important stopover for these birds. So when they migrate, they just don't leave straight away. They go down, and they'll often spend up to 2 weeks on the peninsula around the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland and Virginia. And when we compared our data to our partners in Vermont and Maine, we found that it was also an important stopping ground for their birds. So there's a regional migration strategy where they're using the resources there and then moving on. So this year, when the pings started dying off at the end of September, we started thinking about, well, what will we do in 2022? And we were going to be continuing the work with the Northeast collaboration. And we were also asked to tag some meadowlarks, which was a new experience for us. And we also were lucky to have a student from Penn who's here, Liam Hart, and he is doing his capstone research on looking at the impacts of land management on grassland bird activity. So this year, we started a little earlier. We started in April with the meadowlarks as part of the Meadowlark Migratory Connectivity Project, which is a collaboration among 12 different sites in the US, coordinated by the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. And the idea behind this project is to look at eastern and western meadowlark populations and to see where their movements overlap and also where they diverge. And then they'll eventually make a movement map that shows all of these separate populations. So as our contribution, we deployed 5 satellite GPS tags, that was pretty neat, because these tags are different from the MODIS tags in that the birds don't have to be near a tower to be detected. So every day, once the tags are turned on, they just send a signal up to the satellite and they can track their movements every day. So it's been a little bit slow in terms of getting our detections, but back in July and August, the birds that were sending transmissions, they were staying local, so they weren't actually moving anywhere. And you can see these are much bigger birds than bobolinks with much sharper talons. And I think Lisa still has a scar from, from one of them. And we continued on with the MODIS, our collaboration with the other researchers. And we this year had a big successful day on May 25th. We deployed all of our tags in one day, so we knew we were honing our field skills there. But one of the most exciting things, I think, for us was that we recaptured 2 males, and they were in the same fields that we had captured them the year before. So this was an opportunity then to see 2 years worth of data for these birds. The other big first for us was that we got our first international detections. So on September 21st and 22nd, we had a bird get pinged down on the north coast of Colombia, which really made sense with what we understood about them. They fly over the Caribbean, enter South America through the Colombian Gateway, and then they move on to the Panatel grasslands in South America. But they don't have as many MODIS towers down there. So it's not likely that we'll track them in the same way that we would be able to track them in the US.
You're getting them though.
So we'll be back to you for that. And the other thing we found was, again, the Delmarva Peninsula was another, was an important stopover. 9 out of our 10 birds were detected there at least once in the region before leaving the area. So going back to our recaps, we have our schoolhouse male who we didn't get migration data on him. We got local detections last year, but then our detections dropped off. So this year, it was interesting to actually see what he was up to after the breeding season. So he headed up to Buck Run Farm with his other buddies. And so he was there for about 2.5 weeks in late July and early August. And then towards the end of that time, he started to move around a little locally. We had some buck toe detections. And then he was on down to the Delmarva Peninsula and was there for 2 weeks before moving south. And our buck and doe male, he just seemed to be a creature of habit. He was on the breeding grounds at Buck and Doe Farm up until mid-July, and then it was on to Buck Run Farm after haying, and the dates were really lining up, you know, from year to year quite nicely. And then his migration route, he left around the same time. It was about mid to late August. And you can see he really took a very similar path both years. And he also had, you can't see with that screen, but he also had stopovers in the Delmarva again. So I guess he likes his routine. You know, you can't blame them. So then this year, the other piece was the field surveys, and we were looking at the influence of management on the grassland bird occupancy. And we were fortunate to keep going back to the fields we had been looking at, but also Jamie Hicks was really helpful in helping us define fields that had different management goals. So we had 4 different types of fields we were looking at. We were looking at hay fields that were mowed early, around May 25th, and fields that were mowed late after July. We also had row crop fields and wheat and rye fields. And so the idea was that we wanted to look at them over the course of the breeding season. So we had 4 survey periods, mid to late May, the beginning of June, the end of June, and then after July 1st. And this wouldn't be like MODIS data in the sense that we wouldn't know continuously what these birds were doing. These would be more like snapshots in time over those 4 periods, so we could kind of see the changing composition of the fields. And we found 7 of our grassland species during these surveys. And these surveys are 10-minute surveys where you go out to a point in the field and you're just looking and listening and recording the birds. So it's somewhat limited in terms of what you're going to be able to take away and say, this is definitely happening. It's not like you're sitting in the field all day and you're doing long-term observations. But we did find that grasshoppers, sparrows, bobolinks, and meadowlarks were breeding in the area. And we had some interesting findings for kestrels and horned larks, purple martins, and savanna sparrows. So the first thing was that almost all of the fields had at least 1 grassland bird species in at least 1 survey. So the birds were here and using the fields. And another thing that was really sort of affirming for me was that when going back to that probability map I showed you, there are some gaps in there. So it's somewhat of guesswork, but we were able to fill in those gaps this year. And we were able to see that those areas that were predicted to have a high probability of having the birds, they actually were there. So it's always nice when real data lines up with the theoretical, what we're saying is supposed to be happening. So looking at some of the individual species, we had bobolinks, and they bred in the late mow fields. They had shown up in the early mow fields, but I think the timing of the mowing was too disruptive to their breeding cycle, so they weren't able to breed there. So we had, they bred at Star Bright's farm, and I'm not good with this stuff, but her farm is right there, and also at Buck and Doe Farm and Schoolhouse Farm. And one of the things that we've found is that the mowing dates have been late at Buck and Doe and Schoolhouse for the last 3 years. So it's because of the way the bobolinks move, if you've ever been in a field with a bobolink, you know that they're just burbling, they're here, there, and everywhere, and you're just trying to figure out like which one is the same bird because they're all over the place. So it's hard to really follow individual birds and to say, well, we can tell that, yes, the numbers were 12 last year and they're 15 this year. But what we can say is that these are high density breeding areas and they are productive and healthy breeding areas for these birds.
Yeah, and Zoe, just, I know the key is down there, but those colored patches.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Symbolize different types of.
Yes. So the green fields are the late mow. The blue fields are the early mow. The purple fields are the row crops. I think it was mostly cornfields. And then the tan is the wheat and rye fields. And that's the same color key throughout for the next few slides.
So just a quick note about those late mowing fields. Most of those fields are being used for mushroom hay, which kind of aligns very well with grassland birds because the delayed, the hay is actually better the later they mow. And so the early mow hay can often be either just convenience for whoever's haying those fields, or it can also be horse hay, which has to be mowed at a certain time to improve the nutritional value. So I think that the moral of this map is, you know, different ways to use the land is a way to also give hierarchy to maybe where we should concentrate our efforts on how we can make some changes to influence, to impact this result. I just wanted to put that in your minds because this is kind of the essence of this work that we're doing. And it helps guide you and put resources into certain areas where you already know that you can be successful. Right. Right.
Yeah. So not every field is going to have a bird nesting in there. So if farmers are looking to schedule, you know, we could be helpful in saying, oh, this is a field where we know they're nesting, or this is a field where we haven't seen evidence of the birds. So, you know, this could be cut earlier and that sort of thing. Looking at meadowlarks, it was interesting to see that they were our most widespread breeder, which was a surprise to me because when I was doing my surveys years ago, I found fewer meadowlarks than bobolinks, but it all depends on the field you're going to, of course. But they were able to breed in our late mow and our early mow fields. So bobolinks tend to nest on the edge of tall grass, and so they also nest earlier, so it's possible that having the shorter grass was not disruptive to them. Yeah, so that was with the meadowlarks and then the grasshopper sparrows. They actually only bred in two of the early mow fields. They looked at one point as if they were going to be setting up territories at Star Bright's field. But they were there for 2 periods and then we didn't see evidence of them. So we couldn't confirm that they had bred there or not. But one of the things about grasshopper sparrows that's tricky is their nesting begins later than the other birds. Really, the safe date for knowing that they could be breeding is June 1st. So it's possible that the earlier mow actually occurs before they're ready to begin nesting, and then they're able to move into that field and breed. The other interesting thing about the grasshopper sparrows was that you can see there's some spots there in the this is a cornfield here, and Liam saw these birds in a grass filter strip along the corn rows. And I had also seen this quite often when I was doing my surveys. So it's possible that those grass strips provide enough habitat for grasshopper sparrows to be able to nest alongside of row crops. And for the other 4 species, it was harder to draw conclusions. With the savanna sparrows, we just didn't have enough detections to really say much about them. And with the other ones, I like to think of them as our pest control crew. We couldn't say that they were breeding necessarily, but they're certainly here during the time that they're meant to be breeding. So horned larks, they just build their nests right there on the ground, and they'll use cornfields often. So they were present there during the time when they were meant to be breeding. So it's possible they were. Purple martins were flying through those the ag fields, and they are great insectivores, and so they like to pick up all of those pests that can cause problems. So they can definitely be an ally. And we also did see purple martins where a nest box is being maintained at Starr's Field. So they were there in that field. So one of the thoughts we had is just like in the Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. If we put up some more purple martin houses, if they're in the area, eventually they may move in and colonize those houses because they're not ground nesters. They like those gourds and the apartments in the sky kind of thing. And then kestrels were also hunting in those ag fields. So, if we can, they're here, obviously. So if we can get those kestrel boxes up, we may be able to increase their productivity. So over the years, there are some things that we have really come to feel clear that we know. One is that grassland birds are breeding in the greater Doe Run area. Bobolinks especially are very, they'll go back to the same nesting site year after year. So if they weren't being successful, they wouldn't be coming back. The other thing is that the birds rely on the connectivity of the landscape to meet their needs. So, the birds don't breed at Buck Run Farm, but they certainly go up there later on in the season. So all of these pieces kind of fit together to fulfill their needs. And also different species occupy different parts of the different types of fields. So you wouldn't really expect to see a bobolink and a horned lark together because they're more specialist species, but you might see a grasshopper sparrow, which is a more generalist, be able to use different types of fields. The other thing we know is that shifting mowing dates benefits these young birds. They need time to get strong and to be able to move out of the way of the mowers when it's time. So that helps them within the year to survive. And then year after year, if we're producing more birds out of fields, we will see a boost in the population. So with these encouraging findings, we see this as an opportunity to make this area a hotspot for grassland birds. And so when we think about the future of the project, there are sort of two things that we've been thinking about as going forward. One is to kind of define a birdscape in Chester County. So we have approximately 25,000 acres that forms a preservation greenbelt in Chester County. And we could look at that area as a focal area for conservation efforts where we work together to address the issues that affect the birds. But the other piece of it is that success will only come through collaboration. So we need to understand what the agricultural and economic factors are related to grassland management. And then with our understanding of that, we can provide guidance for management based on what we're seeing in the fields, what we're seeing the birds doing in the fields. So it's all part of a cycle of feedback that we can, continuously look for and find creative solutions to address the birds' needs. So I'll leave you with this. I've been working in this area for almost 10 years now, and I've really come to appreciate this area. I've had the good fortune to meet landowners like Bill Elkins, who loves his bobbies, as he calls them, and Dee Dee Matz, who held her first bird this past summer. And Dee Dee once said to me that she's happy to share this special part of the world with others who love nature. And that really stuck with me because that's really what we're hoping to do, is to share the abundance of this area. This is a special part of the world. It's a nurturing ground for the enduring cycle of nature. And we can see this through the changing landscape. So whether it's, when we're walking through the fields in April, setting up mist nets to capture meadowlarks and walking through the green stubby grass, or coming for the first day of the bobolink season and being greeted by the newly arrived bobolinks singing their welcoming song, or seeing wildflowers peep through the grass in mid-May, or kneeling down in the wet grass, releasing an anxious bobolink who's ready to return to his mate, or watching a colleague disappear into waist-high grass as she walks around and hand tracks the birds, or watching a flock of bobolinks flutter up and create a cloud above grass that looks like it has all the colors of the rainbow in it. Or later that same day, seeing a bobolink perched and seeming to disappear into a wheat-colored sea. Or walking through the fields a few days before it's set to be mowed, knowing that the nesting cycle is complete, seeing young fledglings taking strong and steady flights. All of these moments in time are pieces of a puzzle that complete this cycle. And they're all linked and they're all necessary. So I love these two pictures because it really represents the connectedness of the land. And on the left, we see the productivity of the land, which is the reason why it still exists in this area when we've seen so much development in other areas. And on the right, we see the birds that are using these working landscapes. And we're hoping that the Grassland bird collaboration can be a bridge between the two, where we work together to build a land conservation ethic that benefits all of those who love and use the land. Work is only possible with a diverse group of people like all of you assembled in this room tonight. And we look forward to learning what's important to you. I thank you for the time that you've taken to be here and your willingness to share your ideas. Thank you.